This is the Logitech G213 Prodigy, a keyboard that I've owned for a good 2 years and used for a variety of tasks like gaming, content creation, and programming. Right now you can find it on Amazon or Newegg for around 50 Canadian dollars or 40 Freedom units. Aw shit, they changed it. Okay, well 75 is still not so bad. In my opinion, $75 is a pretty good deal for what you're getting. Some of the features that I really like are the built-in volume keys, and the playback buttons are a nice touch. But I don't think I've ever genuinely used them for anything in the 2 or more years of owning it. The backlighting is very tasteful, the number pad is great, but I really never used that either. The built-in wrist rest is really helpful, although I haven't noticed any difference typing on keyboards without one. Anyway, all this is important because recently I decided to build my own custom mechanical keyboard. Even though I like the one I already own, it has a few shortcomings, namely its size. The extra space given to the number pad and arrow keys really bother me while I work on videos. This is because while editing, I'm often switching from having my right hand on the mouse to back on the keyboard, and this new form factor would make switching a whole lot easier. Recently, I've also found myself typing way more than I used to, whether it be for online school or for video scripts. Either way, I'm starting to spend a whole lot more of my time typing at my desk, so an upgrade in the form of a linear, mechanical switch seemed appropriate. The third reason I have is the simple fact that I love building things. Whether it be a computer or IKEA furniture or whatever else it might be, this was surely going to be a cool new experience to try. That is, if I didn't mess it up, of course. In the conclusion part of this video, I'll address some other reasons why you might want to consider switching to a mechanical keyboard, and I'll link some other videos made by creators in that community. Now, before I lose your attention, what even is a mechanical keyboard and why do people like them so much? The name mechanical refers to the type of switch being used under the keycaps. These keyboards use mechanical switches that travel up and down to provide an objectively better typing experience and maybe a cooler sound too. The switches are by far not the only components that make a mechanical keyboard special. It's the combination of custom parts made from expensive materials that create the look and feel and sound of a premium mechanical keyboard. I decided to go with linears for my build, mostly because I wanted something smooth and relatively quiet. And let me tell you, I do not regret that decision. Alright, now that you know what it is, how do you actually go about making one? Well, the short answer is you need to buy some parts. In particular, you'll need a case or housing to act as the body of your keyboard. Cases can be made in a variety of different materials like anodized aluminum, wood, or acrylic. However, most consumer keyboards produced by the major brands are made of mostly plastic, which makes the keyboard feel less sturdy and more prone to slight bending when the keys are pressed. Overall, not only do aluminum cases have the nicest look in my opinion, they are also extremely common and durable. Not wanting to waste all of my money, I went for a more mid-ranged ID80 from Idabao, a Chinese seller. In general, this case really impressed me. It was machined really well, and the chocolate coating seems to hold up pretty well after multiple scratch attempts by my screwdriver. I'll give a more detailed review of these products in the end of the video. You'll also need a printed circuit board or PCB and a plate, which is used to cover your PCB and to provide a place for your switches to go into. The case I chose already has a plate attached, so that's nice. Usually a plate would look something like this. Regardless, it attaches to your case with screws. Obviously, you also need to find a PCB that fits your case. In my scenario, I bought the case, PCB, and plate all as a kit, so I got to avoid the added confusion of selecting those. It's also worth noting that most PCBs are actually meant to be soldered to your switches. However, not having the equipment or the know-how, I decided to go for a PCB with pre-soldered hot swap sockets. These pretty much make it possible to take your switches in and out quite easily, and I definitely recommend going this route if you're a beginner like me. Then, obviously, you'll need some switches, one for every hole in your plate. This is probably one of the most highly debated topics on the internet. There are so many different switches out there, and people have all sorts of favorites. With the lockdown and all going on outside, I really couldn't test any to see which ones I liked better, so I decided to stick with what seemed to be a staple in the community: Gateron Ink Blacks. I like their feel, and I definitely think that linears were the better option for me. But then again, I never tried anything else, so don't take my word for it. There are plenty of comparisons and reviews out there, so go watch those first. You'll also want some stabilizers. These are what keep your longer keys from getting really loose or unbalanced. I had stabilizers that came with my case, but I replaced those with nicer Durock ones that screw in. I don't quite know if those were worth the upgrade, but they definitely feel much smoother and firmer than the stock ones. Obviously, get a USB cable to plug your keyboard into your computer, and lastly, we've also got some Amazon keycaps. These ones are made from a nicer plastic, although they're not quite top tier. I chose the color palette specifically to match my brownish burgundy case, and I think that made the right decision. I don't know, you guys tell me how you think it looks in the comments. Now I'd like to move on to a section called non-essential essentials. Pretty much the stuff you'll find here will dramatically improve the sound and feel of your keyboard, but isn't technically essential. Of course, some more than others. First off, you'll need a good lubricant, preferably Krytox 205 grade 0, but you can also buy dielectric grease. But that isn't so necessary. I didn't buy it. If your case already came with stabilizers, buy better Durock ones that screw in. Another extra you can get are little films to put between your switches. Finally, it's also nice to have a piece of foam in between the plate and the PCB, just to help the keyboard not sound so hollow when you type on it. Alright, let's get on to the actual build. First thing you want to do is prepare your switches by lubricating and filming them. In the end, this will help your keyboard feel much smoother and sound a lot cleaner. Even though this is the most time-consuming part, I still strongly recommend it. And if you're already gonna shell out a ton of cash and take a ton of time to put together a keyboard that's uniquely yours, why not go the extra mile? This is how I disassembled my switches. Using the tiny screwdriver that came with the case, I pushed the two grippy prongs on each side outwards and held the opposite side of the switch open until the whole thing came apart. Admittedly, this took a while and hurt my thumb, but after a dozen or so, I was able to make it through the pile at a reasonable pace. Next, I had to lube the switches. The key here is to not overdo it. You can always add more lube, but taking some off is often a little trickier. Pretty much, I lubed the inside of the slider column, then the spring, then the stem, and then for the icing on the cake, I put a film in the middle and closed it back up. This took a couple days, but it's worth it in the end, trust me. Once that was done, I was ready to move on to stabilizers. First, I got these stock ones off the board. They snap in and out pretty easily, which makes them a little more prone to wobble and unwanted rattling noises in general. The new ones I also lubed pretty much in the same way that I did the switches. First the housing, then the stem, and finally the golden rods, making sure to lube all the way past the bend. Then they easily snapped into place, and after that, it was only a matter of seconds before they were all screwed into my PCB. If I had to suggest a place where lubing made the most difference, it would probably be this very moment. Even though the stock stabilizers came with what I think were lubed rods, these ones just felt like they were on another level. I guess my spacebar will be thanking me later. From here, things started progressively getting easier, and all that was left to do was assemble the case, and put the switches and keycaps on the keyboard. I put the foam back in the middle of the plate and PCB, and then screwed it in. The case went on weirdly at first because the spacers on the stabilizer screws for the spacebar were sticking out, but after I got those out, it closed fine. I waited to close the bottom, however, to see if any hot swap sockets fell out during switch installation. I advise you to be quite careful when putting switches in. They do require some force, and the pins will likely bend a few times in your whole build. With hot swap sockets though, this isn't as big of an issue because you can easily pull a switch out, straighten its pins, and insert it right back in. Make sure when you're putting them in that the metal pins go to the top two holes and you can hear some clicks. After the switches were on, I put on the keycaps, which took no longer than 2 minutes, and then I was done. Or so I thought. Later on, when I actually went about testing the keyboard, I had several keys not work right off the bat. Most of these were an easy fix, simply take the switch out, straighten the pin, and plug it back in. One, however, remains broken today. I tried putting in different switches, but as I later found out by testing the PCB, which I realized I should have done when I got it, the hot swap socket was clearly not soldered correctly at the factory, so I'd pretty much be stuck with a broken key. This error could have probably be solved by purchasing a soldering tool, and maybe I will someday. But for now, I find it hard to picture myself going through that trouble for a single print screen key that I hardly ever use. Now, let's move on to the review section of this video. This is the part where I contemplate whether or not my purchase is worth it. Or not. And give some final thoughts on this whole project. Honestly, I really like the look of this case. It feels nice, and the fact that it comes with the foam and PCB makes the deal so much sweeter. But that broken hot swap socket probably means I'll look somewhere else if I'm going to build another keyboard. For $178, I feel like a working PCB is the least you should expect. Aside from that, the case is really nice. All of its other elements are appealing at a relatively mid-range price point compared to any other kits on the market. But I was just thinking, what if it had been my W key that was broken? Well, it's safe to say that that would have been a different story. The switches are nice, although I can't really compare them to any other mechanical ones. Other than my G213, which used rubber dome switches, and the Gateron Inks are much better than those. The keys feel way sturdier and a little harder to press down. The travel distance is very similar, but you can really feel the weight and thickness of the keys when typing. For 80 switches, I paid $76, which means for one switch, you'll pay about $1. On the scale of premium to low end, that's on the higher end of the scale. But if you're buying a mechanical keyboard, putting your money towards a nicer switch goes a long way. The 4 stabilizers, lubricant, and switch films cost $45, and the keycaps cost $60 on Amazon, which means in total I spent $360 on a keyboard. To be fair, that's around 280 American dollars, but still, that's 7 times more than what I paid for the Logitech. Is this custom keyboard 7 times better? Well, objectively no. Obviously, as you increase the price, you run into the law of diminishing returns, but that aside, it was still worth it for me. Tangibly, this keyboard feels 1,000,000 times better than any other keyboard I've ever typed on. The machined aluminum build is very sturdy, and there's no noticeable flexing when I type. The lubed Gateron inks sound and feel amazing, and the keycaps also provide a heavier, more solid typing experience with the added benefit of less shine. You know, that shine that starts to come in when you type a lot with your greasy hands? Tangibles aside, the knowledge, experience, and fun that I got out of this build are valuable too. If something breaks, I'm no longer going to have to throw out a whole keyboard just for one broken key. I can order parts and fix it. That's the kind of stuff that really doesn't have a price tag. Either way, this keyboard complements my whole setup nicely, I think. Initially, I was going to go for a bright red aesthetic similar to my speakers, but decided against it in the end. Finally, I give you one more sound test of my fully assembled, custom ID80 mechanical keyboard.